So now we're going to talk about the social development in middle childhood. Social development in the middle childhood, the children, they move into the industrial versus inferiority stage. And children in this stage, they learn to be productive and accept evaluations of his or herself efforts, or they become discouraged and feel inferior. And they also begin to view themselves less in the term of physical aspects and more as psychological traits. So that just means that instead of a child saying, maybe, oh, I'm a fast runner, or I'm good at drawing, or I'm good at painting, they're going to start saying, oh, I'm pretty smart, I'm pretty talented, and I'm really friendly. Children's self-concepts become divided into personal and academic spheres. And they evaluate themselves in four main areas. And the four main areas, as you can see down here, are the academic, self-concept, social, emotional, and physical. And then they can be broken down into more. With academic self-concept, children, it's obviously to do with academics. A child might say, I'm great at math and science, but grammar is hard for me. If people are good at math and science, then they're most likely not going to be that good in English or history. With social concept, a child might think that they're very popular and people like them, and that's determined by their peers and significant others. With emotional, it's just they're being very emotional about things. And physical, they might think I'm pretty good at basketball, but someone is way better than me. But with physical, it's determined by physical ability and physical appearance. With some comparison, when we're asked to compare ourselves to someone, we compare ourselves to someone who is around the same age as us in the same educational level. But younger children tend to make a judgment that is good or bad in an absolute sense when judging their abilities to do something. They use social comparison, so they're comparing themselves to others to determine their level of accomplishment. People now turn to social reality, which means people view themselves based on social norms. So basically what that means is people view other people just based on, what society deems as normal. But downward social comparison is just when children compare themselves to others that are less able to do something that they can do just to protect their self-esteem. With self-evaluation, children make judgments about themselves, and they're usually being in a good way or a bad way. Basically, it's a individual's overall and specific positive or negative self-evaluation. So basically, self-esteem is just, self-evaluation. And it's more emotionally oriented, and self-esteem is higher for some areas and lower than in other areas. So, for example, a boy's overall self-esteem may be positive when it relates to his athletic abilities, but negative when it relates to his artistic abilities. And self-esteem usually declines during school transitions because students are transitioning from like elementary school to middle school, and their self-esteem is dropping just during the transition, but it's only temporary. Children with low self-esteem, they tend to follow the cycle of failure. So here is the cycle of failure. It goes low self-esteem to low performance expectations to high anxiety and reduced efforts, and they actually fail. So for example, a child may have low self-esteem when he's taking a test, and he's expected to do bad, so he actually performs bad, and that causes him to have high anxiety because he'll need to pass a test to pass the class, but then he ends up actually failing because he has low self-esteem. And then children with high self-esteem tend to follow the cycle of success, so they have higher expectations, and they'll actually succeed and they'll just follow that path. The goal is to break this cycle of failure. The best way for a child to break the cycle of failure is by their parents. That's one way. And the best way to be, the best parenting tip is to be an authoritative parent. And that's just someone who is very loving and emotionally supportive, and they're always encouraging their child. So if their child's feeling down, then they'll just, tell them to keep their heads up. They got this, and just keep encouraging them. With race and self-esteem, there's been a study, a pioneer research study, where the children were given a black doll and a white doll, and they were asked which one they wanted to be, or they would ask which one's good, and they would always pick the white doll because society has made African Americans or blacks to look bad. But now, in the middle childhood age, black children actually show higher self-esteem than whites during the age of 11, because during this age they become closely identified with their race group, and they view it as in a positive aspect. So they view that their race, being more positive about it because they're more aware. With Hispanics, they show an increase towards the end of middle childhood over than whites. And then Asian Americans, they have a higher self-esteem at the beginning of elementary school than whites, but then they decrease by the end of the childhood. The reason for the low self-esteem for different types of race is the social identity theory. And basically that's just people of a minority group will most likely accept negative views of themselves held by the majority group if there's nothing they can do to change their status. Relationships. Children in this stage begin to start making friendships and becoming closer with their peers. And friendship provides children with information about the world and other people as well as themselves. And friends also provide support that allow children to respond more efficiently to stress. So it keeps children, less stressful when they have friends because they have someone to talk to. And having friends makes children less likely to be the target of aggression. And it can teach children how to manage and control their emotions and help them interpret their own emotional experiences. It also provides a training ground for communication and interacting with others. They also can foster an intellectual growth by increasing children's range of experiences. And with this, there are 3 stages of friendship. Number 1 being basing friendship on other behaviors, which this is about from the ages 4 to 7, and they view the children or the person that they're talking to or spending the most time with as their friend. But then moving up down to the basic friendship of trust, that's between ages 8 to 10, friends are seen as those who can be counted on to help out when they are needed. And with the third stage of basic friendship on psychological closeness, friendship is characterized by feelings of closeness, usually brought on by sharing personal thoughts and feelings through mutual disclosure, and that's between the ages of 11 to 15. With cross-race friendship, it's just when children have friendships that are different races, they actually have many benefits. One being it can protect students from negative effects of discrimination on their well-being, and also they're more positive racial attitudes. They have a more positive racial attitude. With popularity, popular children tend to form friendships with more popular individuals, and non-popular children seem to form friendships with less popular children. And popular children are more likely to form cliques, and cliques are groups that are viewed as exclusive and desirable, and they tend to interact with almost everybody that they want to interact with. Popular children are usually helpful in cooperating with others in joint projects, and they tend to be funny and have a good sense of humor. Unpopular children, they are able to read other nonverbal behaviors and understand others' emotional experiences. So they understand people even when they're not talking. Social problem solving. Social problem solving is a factor that relates to child's popularity. It refers to the use of strategies for solving social conflicts in ways that are satisfying both to oneself and to others. And according to a psychologist, social problem solving perceived through a series of steps to correspond to children's information processing strategies. So these are the steps to the right of this presentation. First, they start with this social problem. And for example, this social problem happens while playing a game with Will. He complains about the rules. First, they find and identify relevant social cues. So Will complains and he looks upset. Next, they interpret and evaluate the social cues. The reason why Will is upset is because he's losing the game. Next, they determine the possible problem-solving responses. He could defend the rules, criticize Will, or remind Will of a past success. Next, then you'll evaluate the responses and their consequences. So, like if he chooses to defend the rules, then Will become angry. But if he criticizes Will also become angry again. But if he reminds Will of a past success, then the situation is diffused. So then what they do is he chose that. So then the whole situation is diffused. So those are kind of like the steps of problem solving. In social competence, several programs have been developed to teach children a set of social skills that seem to underlie general social competence. For example, there's an experimental program of a group of unpopular 5th and 6th grade students, and they were taught how to hold a conversation with friends, and they were taught to disclose materials about themselves. They learned about others by asking questions and offering help if needed. But when popular children did that, they had a hard time doing that. Gender. Social networks. Social networks are most boys and girls consist almost entirely out of the same-sex group. So boys will interact with boys and girls will interact with girls at this age. But when boys and girls when they occasionally interact, people might view it as a romantic overtone, also known as a border walk. So for example, a girl might threaten a boy to kiss them if he doesn't leave them alone. Which that means that there is a lack of cross-gender. Lack of cross-gender means that friendships are restricted to members of their own sex. And boys typically have a larger network of friends than girls do, and they tend to play groups rather than pair off. And then there's with boys, there's a different status within the group. There's a leader, and then there's members who fall behind the leader. This is known as the dominance hierarchy. And it leads to styles of play, which it means that they interact with and interpret when a child feels that his status is being challenged. So the guys will, if he's the leader and he feels like other people are trying to be the leader, he will do something about it. And they try to assert dominance by doing that. With girls, they focus on having one or two best friends who are equal to their status. And they prefer to maintain equality. So they think that all their friends are equal. When there's conflict, it is usually solved through compromise. And they usually use language that is less confrontational. So they might be like, hey, could I please have my pencil back? And other than guys would be like, give me my pencil back. With bullies, About 85% of girls and 80% of boys reported experiencing some form of harassment in schools at least once. And about 160,000 children stay home because they were scared of being bullied. And now moving into the age of, middle school and like middle years, children are introduced with cyberbullying, and cyberbullying is harder now because people can get bullied online anonymously, and it's really hard to find who it is. Children who are bullied are usually very passive, and they tend to cry easier than others, and they often lack the social skills that might otherwise diffuse a situation. And 90% of middle school children were reported being bullied at some point in their time during school. And over half of bullies come from an abusive homes. Bullies are more likely to break the law as an adult than their peers. And there are some programs that will help reduce, they're trying to help reduce bullying. The programs at our school are teaching students to stand up to bullies by intervening and not just walking by, and teaching them how to stand up for themselves. Families. One of the biggest challenges facing children and their parents is the increasing interdependency that characterizes children's behaviors during middle childhood. Decisions. With co-regulation, it's which parents and children jointly control children's behaviors. What that means is just a parent they give strict and they give guidelines to their child, and then they expect the child to follow that. But the child again has their own destiny, so they choose what they want to do. So, for example, a parent might give their child some money for lunch, and they're like, okay, you can use this on lunch money, but the child doesn't have, they might use the money to buy something else, but they don't have to tell the parents. Siblings can also influence children during middle childhood. They can provide a sense of support, compassion, and a sense of security. But they also can be a source of strife. But it's usually children, when they fight, they're usually in the similar age and the same sex. And culture differences are linked to siblings' experiences also. So when Mexican American families, siblings are less likely to respond negatively when younger siblings receive equal treatment. So if a sibling receives equal treatment, they'll be like, well, that's good. But if they don't, then the older child might be like, hey, that's unfair. That didn't happen to me when I was their age. And then they start fighting, so on and so forth. Having no siblings, it has their perks. They're better adjusted, and they often have a higher self-esteem and stronger motivation to achieve. But also, they might be lacking, social interactions at home, because they might only talk to their parents, which are older, and they don't have anyone their age to talk to. And parents working outside of homes has become very popular, over the few years. And sometimes children are left home, and those children are called self-care children. And that's just, they're left home without, parental guidance or parental supervision. Back in the day, children who stayed home by themselves when their parents went off to work, they were often called latchkey children, and that was just because the lack of supervision, parents were scared, that they weren't safe, or something bad could happen to them. But there's honestly some positive benefits of children staying at home. One being, it gives the child a chance to decompress and relax at home after a long stressful day. They can just stay at home alone and just relax. Also, staying at home rather than hanging out with people outside of school might keep their children safe. But there are some negative effects. Some children might feel lonely, and they might get depressed. Children who the self-care children, they may have a higher self-esteem because they feel that they are contributing to the household, more, because if they're at home, they could, feel like they own the house, when they're alone. So they might like clean, or they might cook dinner or cook something. Women who are satisfied with their lives tend to be more nurturing with their children. So when work provides a high level of satisfaction, the mothers who work outside of the home might be supportive of their child. So they might keep their child safe, or they might make their child feel, more at home, or more comfortable being at home alone. And children whose parents work outside of homes, and parents who work from home, in the end, they all still hang out with their families the same amount. Because some people were scared that they were interacting with their whole family, but in the end, everyone's hanging out with like their whole family just the same. And there are a few types of, families. And over half of the United States children spend their entire childhood living in the same house as both their parents. So meaning that about 50% of children do not stay in the same house with both parents. And one of the types of families is a divorced family. And how children usually react to divorced families is, and the parents, like right after the divorce, children and parents might become depressed or anxious, and sometimes they might even have a hard time falling asleep due to what happened. But this is a short-term effect, because usually a few months or up to 2 years after, then everything goes back to normal, and they return to their pre-divorce selves. And with divorce, children tend to blame themselves for the divorce, and children who grow up in a divorced family are more likely to divorce themselves, like with their spouse, when they get older. Another type of family is a single parent family, which is in the name. It's just when children live with only one parent, mom or dad, or 1/4 of all children under the age of 18 in the United States, they live with only one parent. And I myself only live with one parent. And single parent families, it's mainly in minority groups such as African Americans and Hispanic families. And about 60% of African Americans children live in a single parent family, and about 35% of Hispanic children live in a single parent family. And the reasons for a single parent family, there are many reasons why. In a very rare case, it's due to a death of, the other spouse, or no spouse was ever presented, so the parents never married. The spouse they were divorced. And single parent families are often less well off financially than two parent families, and living in a relatively poverty has a negative impact of their children. And another type of family is multi-generational. Multi-generational is just having they can have the parents, grandparents, and then great-grandparents living in the same house. And children who live in a multi-generational family tend to have a rich living experience. Some complex include several actions as disciplinary without coordination. So what that just means is, like, with that many people, children might not really know who to respond to or how to respond, because there's so many, parent figures in the house. In African American families, even though they might be in a single parent household, they rely from like older generations, like grandparents or great grandparents. The next type of family is a blended family, and that's just when a mom or dad, they get remarried and then they move in together. And about 17% of children in the United States live in a blended family. There are many challenges that children face with living in a blended family. It includes, like responsibilities are unclear, expectations are unclear because the child might the one when they're living with the parent that they've been living with their whole life, they might like follow rules from that parent, but then if they get married, the rules might change and the child just might not know how to react to that. So it causes them to, they just don't know how to react. Um, they might not know how to behave towards, their step parents or their step siblings because, they might need to learn how to share because if you're, some parent, like children they go from, being an only child to marrying into a family with multiple children, so they might need to learn how to share because they haven't really had to share growing up. And but with this blended family, it might increase opportunity for more social interaction. So they get to interact with more people, so they get to learn more. And another type of family are families that are LGBTQ, so that lesbian or gay families. So 1 in 5 million families are headed to be gay parents. So that just means that about 1 in 5 families they have the same sex as parents. Children develop similarly to the children of heterosexual families, and their sexual orientation of the child is unrelated to their parents. So their parents could be gay, but they might be straight. Like that isn't their parents just doesn't really influence them of their sexuality. And it seems to be an equal, well-adjusted, like when it comes to heterosexual and gay families, they used to tend to be equally well-adjusted. But children who live in a gay family, they tend to have like a better relationship with their parents. African American families often have a particularly strong sense of family because they are often welcomed and supported extended family members into their homes. There is like in their family, there's a relatively high proportion of families headed by older adults, such as grandparents. With Hispanic families, children are taught to value their ties to their families, and they come to see themselves as a center part of an extended family. So basically, that they're taught that their values are influenced by their family. So who they become is, tied to their family. With Asian American families, they see that the father is no more like a powerful figure, and that with Asian American families, they see that their father is more like a powerful figure, and they should maintain discipline. So children tend to believe that family needs to be a higher priority rather than their personal needs. So their family is more important than themselves. With poverty, poor families have fewer basic everyday resources, and there are more disruptions in children's lives. For example, like how a parent, they need to move so they can find a better job, so they will change schools and change houses. And economically disadvantaged children are at a risk for a poor academic performance. They have higher rates of aggression, and they conduct problems. So that just means that children who are in poor areas, their academics may not be that well, just because they're probably not really focused on school. They're probably just very sad how they have to keep on moving, and they keep having to leave friends and everything. Group homes. Group homes used to be called orphanages, but now they've been changed to group homes or residential treatment centers. Um, it's typically housing a relatively small number of children whose parents can no longer take care of them. These children, they could live at the house until they get adopted or until their parents become stable and they can take them back. But 500,000 children in the United States live in group homes. And I personally lived in a group home when I was younger. And children who have developed severe problems, because, if you have to leave your family and you move, to like a place where you've never met these people and they're strangers, you might like act in a certain way. With you might have aggression and anger, and that's actually children with higher levels of anger. It's difficult. It's more difficult for them to be adopted, and they'll basically they'll live like their whole life in a group home until they turn 18 and they have to move out.